Chair voice, we are live.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. This is the Wednesday, May 15th, 2024 Technical Advisory Committee meeting. Unfortunately, we do not have a quorum today, but we do have enough people to listen in and get an update on our 6-year program and the preliminary deployment plan for the regional BRT system. So we will skip the first action item due to not having a quorum. We'll shift the summary notes last meeting to next meeting, and we'll go right into Mr. Shree.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members of the committee. In your last meeting, we went through all the evaluation results, all the quantitative analysis, qualitative considerations we looked at, presented all that to you. Today, we want to go into detail about one specific item in that where we want the feedback. So, next slide. Want to see the larger picture first. Mentioned about what I presented at the last meeting. We have a series of measures and components that we look at. One of them, the alignment with core values that we looked at as part of the qualitative considerations. This is the first time we are looking at those 3 core values and try to figure out how we can look at these applications and see how well they align with these core values or not. The core values, as you may remember, were adopted as part of transaction. So the transaction was adopted in December 2022. So this is the first 6-year program update that is happening after authority adopted those core values. So we want to try and figure out a way to develop a methodology to analyze these projects or evaluate the projects to see how well they are. So we developed a methodology. We looked at that, and if you go to the next slide, we presented that in this chart that we showed you last time. All the color-coded columns, they're all the qualitative measures, except the last color-coded one, which is long-term benefit. That is actually a model-based quantitative analysis, but we converted into 3 categories there, which, remember, the jurisdictions, the transportation benefit received per jurisdiction is approximately equal to the revenue they brought to the table, or they got less benefits than revenue, or they got more benefit than. So that's the 3 colors in the last column there. The 3 columns before that are the equity, safety, and sustainability, the 3 core values, and how well these projects align with those core values. You'll see yellow and green there, which are like high and medium. That's what we did. We wanted to go through that methodology we used to reach at these decisions, these results, and get your feedback on that so we can make this better, more robust at the next cycle. Next slide, please. Again, looking at the larger picture, you already know transaction rating. There are 10 performance measures, and this table clearly shows that we are already looking at several of these, or all these core values under several of these measures. So it's not that we are not looking at core values at this point. We're already doing it through these measures, quantitative measures. But we wanted to look at separately as an application, how well they are addressing this. Next slide. I will not read through all of this. That's a definition adopted by the authority. The underlining is done by me to get some key points there. Ensures fairness, and with the project should be serving underserved populations. When we say underserved population, it's not just low income or minority, but a series of groups that we identified here. It should also facilitate social and economic opportunities. And we all know that in the past, several of these transportation projects created injustices to several communities, and we want to make sure that we don't repeat that. We want to avoid any such injustices happening. So some of the examples here that we think are components of projects that aligns well with the definition, providing benefits to equity emphasis areas. Equity emphasis area is a term used by our NPO TPP. It looks like some of these criteria like low income, minority, some of those aspects, and they created a threshold. Uh, if a particular zip code or a TAZ, transportation analysis zone, traffic analysis zone, if that falls under that threshold, then it is considered equity emphasis area where you want to make sure that those people are served well and not creating any more problems for them. When we did transaction, we modified that to more align with what is in Northern Virginia, not just the entire BC region, but more focused on Northern Virginia. So we looked at that definition, Northern Virginia definition, to see if these projects are benefiting those people living in those areas. Other examples, as noted there could be separated and protected bike facilities, which makes people travel, use those modes other than driving, especially how they are serving in those populations. Zero emission buses that will reduce emissions happening in, especially in equity emphasis areas or for those people in general. ADA accessibility, that's most of the, I think, various federal regulations require you to do ADA compliance for projects, but we want to make sure that that is specifically considered in these projects. Next slide, please. Safety. Very much straightforward, I would say. We want to minimize fatalities and severe injuries. We want to increase safe, healthy, and equitable mobility for all. We also want to address perceptions of safety. One thing that keep coming in various surveys is that when we talk about safety, people are not just talking about the actual incidents, but their fear of happening something. Which many times they can overlap, not safety overlaps with security. So perception is also important. We want to make sure that is addressed. Examples, traffic calming measures, pedestrian scale lighting, wayfinding that can somewhat address that perception. Bus lanes by pedestrian safety infrastructure. Yes, number of acronyms are there. These are all tools and techniques used to help pedestrians and bikes cross streets and go along the streets. Intelligent transportation system and transit signal priority. These are all various techniques currently used, but we want to make sure that when a project is developed, they consider these aspects to improve it. Next slide. Sustainability. Generally, people understand it, but more in terms of environmental sustainability. But sustainability can also be economic and social aspects of it. So we want to make sure all three are addressed. For example, under the economic pillar, we can think of congestion relief that makes an area more attractive for jobs and people to live, so that how the project is reducing congestion. New routes that are connecting between systems, say between two bus systems or between bus system and metro, those sort of how they are connecting. And also connecting activity centers. When you activity center is not just regional activity center, that's another term used by TPV. Especially TPV identified several regional activity centers in the entire BC region. There are several in Northern Virginia too, but the density of that goes less. It becomes sparse as we go towards our western part of the region. But there are activities centers happening there. So we want to make sure not just the RAC, as they're called, other activity centers are also considered. How these new routes are connecting those activity centers.
When you get into the economic side of sustainability, do you look at all at future maintenance costs?
No, that's not the one.
That's not what you're getting.
Financial part.
So the idea of what it's going to cost to maintain new things is not considered anywhere.
That is not considered as part of this. Environmental, again, we keep repeating these things, zero emission buses. So whatever areas that can reduce emissions, make it more sustainable, environmentally sustainable. The last pillar there is social, which is more about placemaking, how wayfinding, lighting, community art, these kind of things can make, for example, say an intersection or nearby intersection, how that area can be more people friendly, that makes people easy to use that and make that cross the road or things like that. And also connecting socially significant cities such as a community center or other gathering sites and immigration areas and things like that. How you connect? Is the project connecting them? If yes, then that is a good. So that's how we looked at sustainability. We had all these definitions and examples developed. By then, it was time for, we already had the call for projects out, so we shared a guideline for applicants to look at these definitions, examples, and try to incorporate them into the application. We didn't have a methodology how we are going to use and analyze it, but we had this guideline. So we provided the guideline is a 2-page document. It's part of the packet, and you will see that. So we provided that guidance document with several examples and things like that. We strongly encouraged, but it was not mandatory for the applicants to submit a separate core value alignment statement, but we encouraged them to do so. Again, this is the first time we are doing it, so we wanted to test it out and see how it works. We didn't want to make it as, okay, if you don't do it, you're not going to get scored or anything like that. So we asked them to provide a separate core value statement, not more than 3 pages in length, include all 3 core values and tell us how your project is going to do that core value. Next page. Yeah, so as I said, by then we were already in the middle of application period, so we didn't have a time to go out and show them what the evaluation method would be. We were still developing it. So here is what we did. This is exactly where we want your feedback. What more can we do? How differently can we do these things? So we looked at if somebody submitted a core value statement, we reviewed that also. Otherwise, just the application. Then we answer a series of questions. But first one is the submission SMART? Again, each letter stands for something specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time bound. Is this application SMART for each of the core value? Each of the SMART, each of them can get up to 1 point. That means a total of 5 points for each core value. Is the submission consistent with the definitions we already shared? If it is really consistent, then or most consistent, then you get maximum 5 points. If not, at the bottom it is 1. We also wanted to know how these components synergize or detract from each other. Something that will be really good for, say, sustainability. That components may not be helping safety or may not be helping equity. So we want to make sure that that synergy is developed. So if it is synergistic, then you get a high point. If not, if they are competing with each other or detracting from one another, then you get a low.
Have you been reviewing some and finding that they have conflicting?
In some cases, yes.
They actually are conflicting.
So in some cases, I'll come to that because after the questions, I will come to that point. So then we had some questions specific to each of the core values. For equity, does the submission address equity in a meaningful way, or are you just saying it for the sake of saying, yeah, we address equity properly, or do you have specific examples how that project is addressing the equity aspect of it? Is the intention to be equitable, thoroughly integrated throughout the project? It's not just one item, but during design, what kind of design features will be part of that equity analysis? Who are the users? You have public engagement opportunities, how you are incorporating into that, or those opportunities, things like that. Then for safety, let's say take a comprehensive view of safety. There are multiple users. Again, for example, making a road widening or making a smoother traffic is probably good for emissions. Sustainability factor where emission is going down because stop and go traffic is not there. But that means, is it now deflecting or creating more problem for safety? People trying to cross the road, they're not able to cross as freely or as safely as possible if vehicles are moving fast or continuously. So that's one example of where that conflict can come. So we want to make sure that when the project is developed, it's looking at all users, looking at quantitative and qualitative data, addressing the perception of safety. In many cases, safety is a major, if not the primary reason why they want to do the project. So if that is the case, then they get a high point. For example, addressing an existing hotspot. So if that is the case, then that is directly addressing a safety issue. Under sustainability, we want to look at greater regional context. Is this project crossing multiple jurisdictions or connecting multiple multimodal facilities? Are they connecting multiple systems? As I mentioned earlier, connecting the bus to a metro, things like that. How does this submission compare to established best practices? There are various things that you see in projects around the region, around the country. For example, lead certification or electrification, EVs, bikes are used. Emission reduction strategies are applied. Schedule optimization, shared use paths, expanding transit, stormwater management. How is this project considering all those aspects or some of those aspects? Based on that, we gave them different scores. So those were the questions we specifically looked at and tried to score them. Next slide, please. So when you add up all that, each score value can get up to 25 points. This is where I'm trying to answer your question is, we know this is a lot of subject, there is a lot of subjectivity here. It's not based on the data like model or analysis we can do. So we had 3 reviewers looking at each application independently and going through this method and score. That's where the subjectivity is like, I may score a project thinking that this is great for safety. Another person might think that this is not great, and so our scores might be very extreme. So we wanted to make sure that we avoid that subjectivity by doing multiple people's and taking average of their scores. One drawback, again, this was pointed out by the Planning and Programming Committee, PTC, where we presented it last week, is that when you do that, you are averaging many scores and you probably will not see any extremes, right? So, which is partly true in the score sheet, you see most of them got high or medium scores. None of them were scored as low for any of the 3 core values. That probably is partly because of that averaging. But that's one way we thought to avoid any subjectivity. We gave additional points for applicants who actually provided core value statements. So they put some efforts. Not all of them did, but again, because they put some effort, and we wanted to give them an extra point to make sure taking care of. So at the end of all the scoring, we put them into low, medium, high. As you saw in the chart earlier, most of all the projects scored next. That's it. So you can see they got high or medium scores. None of them were scored low.
That probably reflects also the fact that people who are writing these statements aren't idiots and they knew how to scope it. So that it would sound good.
If you want, I can go through the detail of some of the examples, but in general, we project that, or when we evaluated them, if they got low score, that is because either they didn't mention at all, or how this project or the project didn't describe, or they were not able to figure out what is this project doing for equity or safety or security, or details were very sparse, so we couldn't really do that. But that, as you said, that was not the case. There is some mention, some description somewhere we could find out. So if there are some details, then they got medium. Some of them gave more data analysis to show how their project is really addressing this. They got that's in general how it came out. I have a few slides, but again, this is picking nitpicking a little bit more into each of, we may pick up three examples here. One where all of them got really high score, where they gave really good examples and data and analysis to show how they're addressing this. There are areas we thought they could do a little bit better, a little bit more, but again, that's a feedback we want to give to the applicants next time. Right? Here is one example where all the three core values had a medium score. And we can see that either they didn't give full details and analysis, or they are missing certain pieces, they are doing only certain aspects of what could be done, not all of them, or there is some areas where they're distracting each other. Next one. There's a mix of this because that project really addressing safety in this case, not much happening on the other two aspects, but they're really addressing a specific issue for safety. So they put high score for safety, but not high score for other areas. That's what I wanted to talk to you and get your feedback. What do you think about this? What are the areas we should look for? Elaborate. Is there ways we should be looking differently? In your experience, in your knowledge, have you seen jurisdictions, agencies looking differently or more detail?
This is a challenge,
It is.
I think. When you start to think, where can we put something quantifiable somewhere to help us? I think it's harder to do because you're also looking at projects in different modes. For instance, like, sure, a crash modification factor for a roadway intersection safety project, but that might not really apply to, say, some of the transit improvements. So you really can't cross compare those, which almost forces you into a subjective type of way. I noticed that you're doing a scoring process through this proposed way. Was there any consideration, and let me know, poke holes in this, was there any consideration to ranking them top to bottom in each of the three categories, like relative to each other? And then kind of stratifying, top tier, mid tier, bottom tier?
So if you can go back to that chart. Yeah, this is where we try to do that. So the scores were given, one more slide, I think. Yeah, that's one, this one. So at the bottom, you can see out of those, we can get up to 25.
Based on the scores.
Based on the actual numbers. And then we said the bottom 1/3 will be low, medium, middle 1/3 will be medium, top 1/3 will be the highest. Within that, if you're asking about within that, if you want to say five projects were scored high.
I see what you're saying, in other words, instead of doing, if you took the scores and you listed them top to bottom, do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
And then the bottom tier you'd always have an orange, yellow, and a green, no matter what.
Okay.
I wonder if that, I don't know, I think you'd have to test it to see.
No,
I wonder if that would tell a
that's
story
like we want
a
to
little bit more, maybe less diluted, just. You think, poke holes in that?
Yeah, there's, it's like Lake Wobegon, all the projects are above or below average. Why would you think there will always have to be 1/3 of the projects that are poor?
They're not, it's a relative comparison, I would say.
Well, but how does that get
So I wouldn't
factored
call
in
it like-
further on down the line?
Yeah, I just think it's the equity relative, this project relative to the other projects. It would have to be a relative core value comparison, maybe. Just an idea. Are there other ideas?
Man, while you were talking about the rating system, I was thinking, if it's good enough for ice skating, it's good enough for this. But it's very difficult because so many of the things that they're talking about really are subjective. And I think the fact that you've got 3 different people rating, were you finding consistency among the ratings of the 3 people you had during the ratings, or were you finding much variation?
In some cases, we found variations. So yeah, it is not, that's a subjectivity we expected to happen, and we found that was happening.
I mean, for our judges, it was the first time they had been asked to do anything like this.
What's the battle? Were they members of the staff?
Yes.
So, okay, with different backgrounds or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Haven't been on this committee for 17 years. Since 2007. We've not had this evaluation added into the mix. I just have to remind everybody that the bottom line score is that congestion reduction in relation to cost is what really drives where things are ranked. And then there's that invisible line of what can we actually fund is where we draw that line. I mean, this helps add to the justification of having these projects up, but you'll notice that even the ones that have all green across the sustainability are not up in the CRRC rank at the top.
So I think-
Which ones are,
So
it's really hard to see.
So this table is sorted by the CRRC rank.
this table in your
And
handout.
which ones are all good on sustainability? Which
For example, the VRE project.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to,
You already
for the people on the,
Backlink Road Station improvements.
that one has green for all three core values.
And still ranks fairly high.
Yes, there are some in the,
Because-
somewhere in the bottom have two.
Because there's congestion relief associated, but that's
But
the highest.
But the very bottom project there is,
Yeah, it's multimodal connection. It's the,
CC to DCA.
yeah, Crystal City to Dulles or Dulles. National, that'd be a big bridge.
I don't wanna imply something or infer something from what you're saying, but are you suggesting that maybe because of that it doesn't need to be looked at in as much detail?
No, I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that in all the years we've been doing this, the CRRC rank is what is driving a lot of the mix here. But adding the sustainability helps us also identify that we're being equitable. We have sustainability in the mix. And you'll notice that none of those have any black marks in sustainability. So the City of Falls Church, signal prioritization project, it's okay on all those things. But according to this, it gets the most bang for the buck.
but what would you do if a project got completely zero ratings on core values, but very high on the CRC?
I would doubt it would even make the list because that, if your safety is black, why are we doing it? Right?
Well, it depends how you define.
Right, yeah, I mean,
I think the one part that makes me feel better about some of these being subjective is your point about the alignment with core values is already also built into the ratings, with the other more objective ratings. It's a great table you have with the core values in the right column. I think it was slide 8 maybe. So it is also taken into consideration there in a more quantifiable way.
yeah.
But the point you were getting at is a little bit interesting. Is the amount of effort that goes into it, both by the people who are preparing the submissions and by the staff reviewing it, worth it if it's not going to affect the final outcome?
Yes, that's what I was trying to ask. Were you kind of getting at that a little bit, like?
So if I may jump in there, so what Chair is saying is that by law, we have to give preference to CRRC.
Yes.
So that's what he's saying, that it drives the whole analysis and results, but and you said about drawing a line where the money is ending. So at that point, that's when some of these qualitative measures come into picture. And there are two projects that are in the bubble. Which one has a better performance in some of these measures? Then that gives us that extra push for that project where it is doing well in these measures.
In our world, that's the political.
Yeah, no, that was great. Thank you, very helpful.
Anything from Armand, Amy? Or Karen?
Yeah, I don't have anything to add, but that's a great conversation.
I mean, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, we'll just have to see how it continues to play out, I think, right now.
Armand's been on this thing almost as long as I have, so he's seen it all.
I don't really have anything. Hi, this is Karen. I don't really have anything to add. Well, I do have one question though. For the core value ranking, is there a way to get the numerical value or it doesn't? Or what do you suggest? Just would that be adding too much to the mix or is that something we would be able to review or is it in a column that I may have missed?
I'll let Sri hit that, but to me, that's getting a little bit more too dilute and too much aggregate in the mix for that. I mean, this is a I mean, it's not, I'm not saying it's not important, it's a qualitative measure to give us a guidance on whether the project is doing what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
Sri.
You actually got to the right point, because many of these qualitative measures, we have a number behind it, but we are not putting a number there because that number may not make much
Yeah, it's
sense
not gonna
in
make any-
the weeks. So actually we group them into different categories and show you different colors. Similar here as we just explained, there is a lot of subjectivity here. And if somebody is giving a lot more data and information, then we have more things to look at and say that, yeah, this is great. If somebody didn't have that information, the application, naturally, they may not get high score. Project might still be doing well, but we don't have the evidence to give them high score. So there is that subjectivity, and that's where we kind of, for the qualitative measures, we leave it at color coded, not giving the actual number there.
Armand's got a question, I'm sorry, Michelle.
No, it's not really a question, but also just to say that speaking to that point, each of those core numbers are an average of 3 scores, correct? So, that's kind of like also giving it a false sense of accuracy, given, the average could be based on drastically different subjective feelings of each of the individual scorers. So I was just thinking that as well. So just another reason not to use the number, just to kind of keep it, the way it is. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was kind of going back and forth and I was like, you know what, I'm just going to ask. But yeah, that's a really good point.
Michelle?
When we were coming up, you mentioned that this is the first time we're doing it and kind of staff got together trying to figure out how should we be defining this? Did you look at other like best practices on how others, define or evaluate equity and sustainability and things like that?
Yeah, we looked at some of the, at least in our region, TPB has been doing some of them, and that we actually capture in that 10 performance measures we mentioned. Accessibility, for example, how many more jobs can people access for the entire region, and then specifically looking at people living in those equity of those areas. So that's one of the ways TPB does it, and we already does it in our measure. So that's somewhat we looked at and said that, yeah, that's already taken care of. What more can we do?
Okay.
Parallelly, we are still doing that research, not just our jurisdictions in this region, but metro areas that are similar to DC metro areas or PR NPOs across the country. We are doing that research to see what they are doing and how we can learn from them and incorporate any more of these evaluation methods to our project.
Any other questions on this?
Did you think about getting more than 3 people?
We could.
I don't know, just like to see, where it falls, because if you have 3 people with 3 different backgrounds, what happens if you have 6 people and some have the same backgrounds and kind of seeing how they fall, like if we have the same years different, but they have the same background, if their scores, if their scores were drastically different, then then there's something really to look at. But if their scores are close, then it has to do with the background. But
So it's a way to get more of a gut check.
yeah,
If you have more,
Yeah.
people in the mix.
Go.
Yeah.
We can.
Just so that-
It doesn't have to happen now. So.
At the end of every update cycle, we do an after action review of our performance. So yeah, I mean, particularly for things like this, which we're doing for the first time, we really do want to understand how it kind of went down through the process and what we can do, not necessarily to make it better, because that implies we did something bad, but to enhance it and to make it, you know, more useful to the process. But at the end of the day, when we refer to core values, you know, it's starting with when we were doing core values in transaction, it was like to remind everyone that the goals of what we're trying to accomplish and the core values of how we are trying to accomplish it. The core values themselves were not goals, although there is overlap. So that's something we always try to keep in mind. I think, you know, to the point about, you know, should we kind of do a third to kind of get the high, medium, low. I think on balance, you know, partly because it was qualitative, going with numbers, kind of lends kind of a spurious accuracy, as it were, to it. That, you know, is there really a difference between 13 and 14 on 25-point scale? So we didn't want to over, you know, cook it with the numbers, but I think we also, you know, we really wanted to set something in motion that when people apply funding to NVTA, they are aware that we have core values and that we want to invest in projects that align with our core values. But as has been said, you know, Code of Virginia really is the major thing which directs what we do, how we do it. But if we can get, you know, congestion reducing projects that are very highly aligned with our core values, that would be the ideal outcome. And we're only going to get there if we start telling people what our core values are and how to make a project better aligned with our core values, you know, in subsequent update cycles. So this is really the start on what we do in the next cycle. Keep in mind the next call for projects is going to be in May of next year, not that far away, to be honest, given the process that the eligible applicants have to go through to decide what to submit to us. You know, they may not be thinking about it today, but, you know, in a few months they will be. So, you know, at that point, we'll also make sure, you know, we either have an after action with them at that time, or certainly early next year when we actually kind of begin to kind of get into full gear for the next call for projects, that, you know, we remind them that this is something you need to think about. We'll probably at that point make the core value statement mandatory. History said it was optional this time. But, you know, if the applicants can't explain to themselves, let alone us, about whether these projects align and put that down in 3 pages of writing, then, you know, I think it's reasonable for us to infer from that that they don't understand core values or don't care. And if that's the case, that's going to eventually affect the projects that get submitted and the projects that get selected. But this cycle, it's a learning experience. And even in subsequent cycles, we have to make sure we understand how this dovetails with the code.
That's interesting about, you know, it will be mandatory next time, and I wonder if, you know, they probably felt like it was a little bit of an afterthought in their application this time around, first time out. Could a list of prompt questions help them in the application? Could, for each of the 3, could you create a list, does your project do this, does your project do this, and yes or no's, kind of help them? It might help you, and then leave open a statement for them to fill in.
Yeah, so when you mentioned about mandatory, we are thinking of incorporating these into the application itself.
Okay.
So there will be, say, 3 questions. One question would be how does this project align with the core value of, you know, details, and give them a space for them to reply to that, rather than creating a separate document out of that application.
Were there many that didn't submit a core value statement?
There was,
There were some. Was there a difference in the number of submissions or the quality by jurisdiction?
I wouldn't say, yeah, the statement when they submitted that itself, you can see some statements were very well written.
Yeah.
There was a lot of thought going into it. Some probably didn't go into that detail.
It might be, I don't know whether you feel it's appropriate, but going into next year, you might be able to make some of the better written ones available as examples. People could see what got good ratings. And when you get right down to it, the core value is, as you said, is, you know, reduction in congestion. That's the real core value.
Yeah.
And these are just sort of overlays.
Do we have any other questions on this? We do need to move on to the Mr. Jasper's part of the presentation. Get to that 59-minute rule.
We're not suggesting it. Well, thank you very much, Chair Boyce. Just as a quick reminder, the preliminary deployment plan for a regional BRT system is something that we've been thinking about for a while. We kicked this off in October of last year, and the reason why we're doing it at all is because we want to protect the investments that we've already made in individual BRT lines. We want to make sure that from that huge pool of projects that are in transaction, some of which will become future investments, we want to make sure that we invest in ones that, are complementary to the others and will eventually lead to a system when complete or near complete, where the whole is greater than the sum of parts. And I think by starting early, even if some of these individual BRT lines could be a decade or more away easily, then there's no reason to not start thinking about how they would fit, even if we aren't going to see them for a long time. So to kind of capture that, I've used the expression previously, think big, start small, build momentum, and that's exactly what we're trying to do with this regional BRT system. It's a bit like starting a new mode from scratch. It's not exactly a new mode. It's a relatively new mode in the region, and there's certainly, at the moment, a great risk if we stay on the current path, we'll just get a bunch of interconnected. Sorry, we'll get a bunch of lines which will cross over, but they won't really connect to make a system. So we want to have this regional overlay. We don't want to take over the work that any of our member jurisdictions or regional agency partners are doing. But we want to focus on what we do best, which is the regional overlay, and let them do what they do best, which is working within their communities to come up with high quality projects, kind of bring those things together. So with that background, we are about to enter an exciting new phase, and I hope we can enlist your support as we go through this. The public comment period for the 6-year program, she's been talking about, that ends on Sunday of this week at 11:59 p.m. If you just get a comment, it will be shut down before 12 midnight. But on the day after, on May 20th, until June 14th, we will open up an online survey, which is related to transportation themes, and particularly things that might be relevant to an upcoming analysis of BRT in the region. During that time period, approximately 4 weeks, we'll have a series of pop-up events around the region in locations where we hope to interact with folks who would not normally interact with us through traditional means. So be that maybe there's a kind of a community that's kind of, whether it's a particular predominance of a language or an equity emphasis area, whatever. We want to kind of go out into the community and encourage people to participate in the online survey, or just to do it directly by interacting with our people at the pop-up event locations. The goal of the survey that's about to start is to add to our knowledge that we built from the perception survey and the focus groups that we conducted earlier, late last year and earlier this year, and to get pointers about things that we should be taking into consideration as we move from the phase 1 of the work, which we're currently in, into the phase 2 of the work, which will start in around July this year. That's when we move into more of the analysis work, currently more in public engagement and doing some preliminary peer review type analysis, but modeling and other detailed analysis is still ahead of us. As part of this transition between phase one and phase two, we're planning what I'm calling a two-part hybrid work session with NVTA members. And it's a hybrid because it won't be a standalone event. We're going to actually schedule it across June and July authority meetings. It's kind of like a two-part thing where we'll give certain information and seek certain feedback at the June meeting, but look for more information coming back by way of feedback guidance in the July authority meeting before we launch into the analysis. The analysis phase will continue until March next year. The analysis will cover things like ridership, congestion reduction, operational considerations, governance, funding, beginning to develop that regional system in more detail than where we are at the moment, which is kind of where we were at the end of transaction at the moment, so pretty high level. We are taking on board lessons as they emerge from some related work that NBTC are doing, and some related work that MARA is doing with their Better Bus program. So we hope to feed that into our phase two work that's coming up. And then phase three, which will follow in spring of next year, we'll have another round of public engagement, potentially more focus groups, another work session with the authority, which I hope will be a standalone work session, so that we can kind of have reactions from people to something more specific than they're able to react to at the moment. So moving from the higher level down much closer to the ground, although not into the weeds necessarily. So that's kind of like a big picture overview of where we are with the preliminary deployment plan. Is there any question for that?
I think there's been a recent report from, is it ITDP that puts out a report on BRT
Yes.
systems, you know, they
Yes.
just recently have a new description of what BRT entails. And I think in many cases, at least I've seen around the country, people selling something as BRT, which is really just a pretty good bus service, maybe. And I think it's important that if we're really planning BRT, that we try to maintain at least a fairly high standard of what BRT really is.
You're quite right. I think at the last TAC meeting, you did mention something along the lines of asking people about how they feel about dedicated lanes if that involves taking a lane away. And that is something that we're building into the online survey. Get a sense of that. Obviously, it's very hard for anyone to really answer questions without the specifics. You know, so it's kind of a bit more at the higher level, more theoretical stage at the moment, but we're trying to make it as real as possible. So the survey itself does include some images of what our consultant is calling like BRT1, BRT2, BRT3, where it's progressively more and more towards what you're probably talking about. But yeah, there's some incremental stages along the way, so we can gauge from people how they feel about how they react.
When you do service like I remember, people who are losing something always know what they're losing. People who might gain something have no idea what they're going to gain, so.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Anybody out in the hinterlands there? All right. NVTA update, Ms. Backman or Mr. Jasper, and playing the part of Ms. Backman today.
Exactly. I'm doing a pretty cool job of it. So, had she been here, I think what she would have said is that the next authority meeting is on June 13th. It has a particularly heavy agenda. So we're expecting a fairly long evening. There'll be some action items significantly related to the 6-year program, will be confirmation of what we call PAYGO amounts, which in more relatable terms is how much money will the 6-year program have. prior to, releasing staff recommendations. So that number should be confirmed at the meeting. There will be probably some procurement approval stuff related to the upgrade of NVTA's website. There are a number of grant endorsements which I anticipate will be asked to make, and probably some standard project agreements for projects that have been previously approved, actually moving from approval through appropriation to actual execution of a contract, which itself will then trigger actual project development activity, and hopefully in some cases project delivery. So that will be the main action items, and then we've also got a pretty heavy slate of information items, including part one of that hybrid work session on the deployment plan I just mentioned. Shri, I anticipate, will be doing a presentation on the 6-year program public comments, and public hearing comments. The public hearing was held last week. So I don't have any numbers yet on how many comments we've got, but we're in the last week of public comments, and we typically see a surge of comments in this week. So there will be a report on those comments. There will be an update, a quarterly travel trends update that we provide, that Ian is heavily involved in developing. So that's always pretty interesting. So I think that's the authority meeting. And the other things of note, I'm participating in Bike to Work Day, which is this coming Friday. And we are going all in on the Roslyn pit stop this year. Not done Roslyn before. We're looking forward to being part of a large crowd of folks who go that day. So we'll probably have 4 or 5 staff there, which is the most we've ever had. It's, I think all accounts is a fun event. And then partly related to the NVT update, but also partly related to what's below the adjournment line on the agenda is your next meeting on June 20th. This is the meeting where we'll be seeking the committee's endorsement for the 6-year program recommendations, which you have not seen yet, but I anticipate you will see late in the day on June 13th. If you're up and you're eager, you can't go to bed until you've got the email. Alternatively, on the 14th in the morning, it's perfectly fine. That would be a sweet for by all means. But that will be released about a week before your June meeting, which remember is not on your normal schedule, because your normal schedule would have you coming here on the 15th. We are meeting with you at 7 o'clock on the following evening. And I'll give you a heads up. If you arrive early for that meeting, because you just can't wait, Planning Coordination Advisory Committee, which is the other NVTA statutory committee, will be meeting at 5 o'clock that evening. Their meetings typically never go longer than 90 minutes, so it should be done and gone by the time you show up. But if for some reason it's running late, and you see people in this room, that will be our planning coordination.
This is where all our meetings will be held.
No, but until we move to our permanent facility, then we'll have our meetings on the 6th. This is shared space, and it's actually quite widely used shared space, so not much in the evenings, but we have to fight to get in this room with the rest of this building. Yeah, so that June meeting is critical because that your endorsement of whatever you want to endorse, be that staff recommendations or some variation thereof, is what then go to the authority for the July meeting.
And that's a Thursday.
That's Thursday. So I just want to make sure.
Yep.
June 20th.
Has there been a feel for the tenor of the comments you've received so far?
No, we haven't gone through the comments.
Okay.
To figure out what it is. It looks like Like he said, last week is when we see a surge.
Yep.
So far, we haven't. I think we received like 140 people commenting. Many people comment on multiple projects, so. If you look at project by comment, then that goes 500, but. Compared to what we usually get, that's probably halfway through. So
Okay.
this 1 week, you
Yep.
may see such.
Very good. Any questions for the update? Anybody out yonder? Okay. We don't even have to move to adjourn, we can just leave because we don't have any forum here.
People on.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. Have a good rest of the month.